You're tuned in to RX Radio.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio. Now, by now, you're used to this part of the show where we try and pay the bills. You know, we shout out Spotify and iTunes. We get you to subscribe and share with your friends and all that. And do that. Absolutely do that. Been wicked to see the growth in the podcast, even in the last couple of months. So huge shout out for all you guys doing that at home. But we're not going to spend any more time paying the bills because I want to make an introduction for today's guest and sort of make an announcement. Joining us today is a very special guest, and he's actually the newest member of the Pre-Script team. So Dr. Dwayne Jackson is a PhD, and not just any PhD. Look, I don't even know how. I was going to have this scripted, and I'm going to go off the cuff here, where we wanted to branch into the education space in nutrition since we started. However, my background is in strength conditioning, applied biomechanics, functional anatomy. Jordan's very similar. And then we've sort of brought in different instructors with different subspecialties within these domains. We have Killian that teaches skill acquisition. We have Stu Locke that teaches the barbell course with us. We have Bagheera, who has his master's in exercise physiology. Baxter's a physio. We have all of these different skill sets that help create a very robust academic calendar around functional anatomy, applied biomechanics. We always wanted to branch in nutrition, but we knew it wasn't going to be us to do it. We just didn't know who it was going to be until one day, fateful day, late last year, in walks Dwayne Jackson to Pure Muscle and Fitness. Now, I want to kind of tell this story the first time I met Dwayne, because it's one thing to know something, and PhDs obviously know one thing. They probably know numerous things. They know one thing well enough to get the PhD title. But what struck me about Dwayne was Dwayne walked in, or I walked into the gym, and Dwayne was behind the counter at Pure Muscle and Fitness speaking with Dorian Hamilton, Noah Hamilton, Anton Vaillant, Frank McGrath, Quentin Beastwood, that's what his driver's license says. Regan may have been there, basically the top Canadian bodybuilders and some of the top bodybuilders in the world. And he was talking to them about kidney function, as you'll talk about, or as we'll talk about today in the episode. Dwayne has quite a personal experience with kidney function, kidney disease, and all that. But I know a little bit about kidney anatomy and physiology, pathophysiology. Anyways, I was like, oh my God, this is very complex conversation I just walked into. And I was at first just grasping a little bit. And by the end of it, the 6 or 7 guys that were behind the counter were all on the exact same page. And we all seemingly had a working understanding of kidney disease, dialysis, nutritional contributions to managing it. And I was just like, as blown away as I was of just, the level of conversation, I was more blown away by the fact that Dwayne could just bring everyone to his level. And we all understood it, and we all could probably have turned around and taught what he had just taught us, which in getting into the academic space in the last couple of years, it was such an impressive feat to take 6 or 7 guys who were just haphazardly kind of paying attention, own our attention, and then teach us seemingly individually what it would take to then turn around and teach this very deep part of pathophysiology. And I was like, holy shit, I need to talk to this guy. And I stuck around for a little bit longer. We came into the studio and we chatted about him as a person, as an educator. So Dr. Dwayne Jackson got his PhD from Yale University School of Medicine. He did his postdoctoral research fellow at Yale University. He's a writer. He's been the director of many supplement companies. He's also was a tenured professor in the University of Western Ontario School of Medicine. So when it came to expanding Pre-Script nutrition, I had very quickly realized that this was going to be the dude. Now, we could have, Jordan and I, fumbled our way through trying to do this ourselves, but we didn't want to kind of sully the quality of the applied biomechanics and functional anatomy arm of Pre-Script's education. So we needed to find someone who took it as seriously and had the kind of skin in the game for the nutrition side that we had for the training side. And not to say that Dwayne doesn't have skin in the game on the training side of things, but a lot of people this day and age are looking to get these credentials to leverage them on social media without actually going through the rigor of putting these principles into practice. And Dwayne has been a tenured professor in one of the most prestigious medical schools in Canada and North America. So with research publications in the hundreds, so very, very honored to have and be able to make the announcement that Dr. Dwayne Jackson will be joining us at Pre-Script and expanding and teaching and developing our nutrition curriculum. So a huge tip of the hat to Dwayne. And guys, you're really going to enjoy this podcast first and foremost, but getting to know Dwayne, you're going to see just how good of an educator he is. And then obviously keep an eye out for the courses that Dwayne will be developing or has developed and will be bringing to you on behalf of Pre-Script. So I've made this a little bit of a lengthy introduction to him, but he should be a man who needs no introduction. His resume precedes him, but more than that, his attention to detail, his track record, his ability to teach, all of the soft skills that really make up the hard science of teaching. Dwayne's all that and more. So hope you guys enjoy the episode. Get very familiar with Dwayne, as you'll be seeing a lot more of him. Be sure to follow him on Instagram. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Tons of content that he puts out that's very actionable. If you're a trainer, if you're a coach, if you're interested in the nutrition side of things, do keep an eye out because the courses will be releasing in May. And he will be overseeing the Pre-Script nutrition arm of the education. So guys, enjoy the episode. As mentioned, give Dwayne a follow. Keep an eye on what he's going to be bringing to the table. Awesome stuff, as you'll see with this episode today. Definitely falls in line with the brand and vision of Pre-Script. The skin in the game. It's got more stories than the Bible, and we'll make sure to parse these stories out for you and bring them to you through RX Radio in the future. So guys, do enjoy the episode, and we'll see you next week.
You walk away, you got $1,600 from like 4 races, or if you race 3 classes, like $1,200, and you're like, a couple trophies. You're like, fuck, I'm making cake. You know what I mean? On the weekend. Meanwhile, you're driving this massive box van that costs.
What's it now?
Oh, and now I don't even know what the what a win is now for like a provincial or a national. In Canada, it probably doesn't pay worth a shit.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., it's crazy.
Were those tough things to run concurrently, like motocross and
bodybuilding?
Yeah, I feel like it'd probably benefit you to be a bit lighter if you're going to be on a bike to a certain degree?
But I was so young that I was already kind of light.
Okay.
So like I when I was bodybuilding at that age, like I as soon as I quit pro motocross, like I quit in June or July, I did my first competition in November. So I was always in really good shape.
What year was this?
Like 91, 92.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's when you were pro.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's when I left things.
The crazy contrast is pro motocross in 91 and the evolution to what pro motocross is in 2022 is orders of magnitude above and beyond where it was. Pro bodybuilding, probably pretty similar. Pro bodybuilding is probably the same fucking green library card that they get on stage and they get placed at their feet. I don't see much of I could be totally wrong. But like pro bodybuilding does not seem to have come very far from the early 90s. From like an ability for what it means to be a professional.
Oh, I agree 100%. Milo Starshev and I always joke around about the fact that the bodybuilding in the the early 90s, like 92, especially 92, that's when Dorian Yates, was really, really kicking some ass, right?
Yeah.
I think you could put the bodybuilders from the 90s up on stage, and I don't think we changed a lot. Like,
what, like, is it, I'm trying to compare motocross to bodybuilding. Is it that motocross is just more palatable, it's more exciting, and that's why there's like this been a relative ascension? Or is it bodybuilding just that?
Yeah, but okay, so if you go to a bodybuilding show, like, so when I raced like in the Sky Dome and whatnot back in the like 90s, late 80s, early 90s, the crowd would have like a mix from like obviously the parents of the people that are racing.
Right.
They'd be in the pits, but relatives and whatnot, friends. But you also had like a mass amount of these like redneck dudes that went there just to see people crash.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like it'd be like
the grave digger.
Like, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
And they'd throw their beer cans in the air when someone crashed, right? And that's why they'd have like the monster trucks and all that stuff. But to put it in contrast, like when I first went to university in the right after right after I quit motocross, I did some bodybuilding shows, and I got a full ride sponsorship with Bombardier Canada for CD racing. And there, like the transfer to those from those two sports was like really, really easy because it was like riding a motocross bike on water, except for you had to lean strange. You had to lean to the outside around corners and stuff. But that whole like the whole idea of motocross and being like a real big spectator sport back then was huge, but it wasn't like people who just love motocross. I actually went off to university after racing the boats, and I'd see people, and I was a pretty damn good rider, and a national champ on the boats. And it was funny because I thought everybody knew who I was, but what you realize is when you go to these races, it's really just like people that go to races.
Yeah.
Right. It's like a bunch of people that aren't in university. So everybody thought I raced. They said, well, is that like monster trucks? Because they associated Supercross with monster trucks more so than they did with motorcycles.
Right.
So yeah. So you realize back then it wasn't really like, that was the first time I actually realized, I lived in my own little isolated bubble. And then, once Monster Energy and Red Bull and everybody started getting into the whole motocross scene, that's when it took off. Contrast to bodybuilding. Bodybuilding has, and I mean, everybody knows this, and I love bodybuilding, we've just talked about it, but has a major association with unhealth to the general pop, right? So you don't you go to these big pro shows and whatnot, and although on stage everything looks glamorous, but a lot of times you go in the audience and it's really not as glamorous as you think. It's not a great big coliseum with 50,000 people watching.
The lobby of a Marriott Bonvoy or something like that. Yeah.
And I guess, and also the risk reward in bodybuilding is pretty big. In motocross, it's broken bones. Nowadays, they're going fast enough that they're seeing some organ damage from, handlebars hitting them in the liver and that kind of stuff. But overall, like bodybuilding still has kind of a connotation of being like, to the general pop, not the healthiest sport. So you don't get the same sort of support from, Red Bull, Monster Energy.
Right. It does seem to be the one sport that's getting more dangerous. Right? Like football seems to have like at least understood the error in their ways, right? Like the CTE stuff, the Junior Seau stuff, the concussion movie with Will Smith. That was like, oh God, like Budweiser pulls a sponsorship, we're fucked. Yep. Right? So like they're at least making concerted efforts as an organization, as a business, to be like, okay, we need to, even if it's just window dressing, we need to make this seem safer than it is.
Well, they even need to make it safe, like hockey and all that stuff. They have to, because the kids, like the pro kids, start when they're like in Timbits hockey, right? They're pushing chairs around. So.
But even still, like hockey, I remember early mid 90s, this would have been Scott Stevens era. Like I remember watching Paul Correa try to find his baby giraffe legs, and he's just like well, he's dead now, like forever. Yeah. But you don't see that much anymore. Like Marty McSorley took his stick to Donald Brashear's head. That was on the news. Like that was worldwide. Like, holy shit, this is part of the sport. And you just don't see that anymore. Right.
So they changed the rules, right? So that stuff like you're
sports.
Absolutely.
But bodybuilding's more dangerous. There are more bodybuilders dying young now than there were back in the Sergio Oliva days in the
Absolutely. So I remember like the Night of Champions when Mohammed Benaziza died. He'd won, and then Porter Cottrell and everything had to like do CPR. And I remember reading this in like Flex or one of the magazines, and being completely fucking blown away, because I was right in the middle of trying to become this big bodybuilder guy, right after the motocross days, and that was like a. You're right, like that was a big shocker, but nothing, like it wasn't like there was 3 or 4 of them that year. Right. Like that was a major shocker, and it was diuretics and whatnot in the end, I believe, that kind of caused those problems. Nowadays, well, first of all, we have 2 problems, right? We have the momentum of the 90s bodybuilders that are still doing it, and the 90s and early 2000s now, they're still doing it, but they've been sick for years. Like when I first got kidney disease, it was like 7 years ago when I actually went in and got diagnosed, but it was happening probably when I was in my 30s, 20s probably. They were like mid 20s.
When he died, where were you in your academic career? Like where were you?
I was just, it was just before, so I was still racing motocross. It was the end of my motocross career, I believe. It was like early 90s. I think it was like 92. It might have been 92 or something.
So you were in what stage of school at this point?
I would have just started my undergrad.
Okay, and your undergrad was in?
Kinesiology at University of Ottawa.
Okay. So you were like kind of aware of the systems at play here. Like it was a shocker to the bodybuilding community, but you were definitely headed on the science trajectory. We would be like, yeah, no, I saw it. Like I can see where this goes wrong to a point where someone does.
Yeah, denial's a powerful tool though too, right? Like,
Okay.
And so for me, like it was funny because I remember sitting in my first physiology class when we did renal physiology and talking to my buddy beside me who also bodybuilt, and we were talking about the renal stuff, and I looked him right in the eyes and I said, well, this is one thing I'm never gonna fucking have. And when I was diagnosed, all that stuff just kind of flashed back. So there's a level of denial. Like I waited till my retinas were detaching before I actually went to the doctors.
On right now.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Tenured professor sitting at my desk writing a grant, and I couldn't see anything but like the aura around my eyes. Like so if I was looking at you, I wouldn't see the middle of your face. I could just see your hair and your beard. And it was like sparks flying everywhere. And I was like, I said, I probably got to go to the hospital. So I went in the office. We worked in the medical school. So I went over to the hospital down the hall, and I was in a hypertensive crisis, like 200 over 115 or something.
At this point, are you surprised?
No, just denial.
Okay. So it's been denial. How long were you in denial for?
Well, last time I got ready for a competition was in 2009. And I just went through a divorce, and I just met my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and we were at my farm, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was cramping, and I always cramped, right? So I'd get up and walk around, and I'd get back in bed, and I drank like 2 full 2-liter torpedoes of diet soda, and at night in bed, like I was obviously there was something going wrong. But anyway, so I woke up and I was cramping, and I was walking through the house, and because I was cramping so bad, I was like Frankenstein walking, so I was knocking over TVs and and all this stuff, right? And my girlfriend at the time, and now wife, is sitting in the room, like I'm thinking, like, why isn't she coming out to save me? But she thought I was going through like roid rage,
oh my
and
God.
Just destroying the house, like
That's amazing. That's like the old after school specials, like Ben Affleck, just like darting his glute, just fuck you, mom.
Yeah, it was exactly that. So I had to lay down in the kitchen, and when I woke up, I was in like a pile of urine, and like it was just horrible. Like, cause I was in state, like I was just completely rigor. And I was thinking to myself while I was laying on the ground, I was thinking, man, my heart cramps, like everything else is cramped.
That's a really good way to look at it. A heart cramp.
If my heart cramps, this is going to be a problem.
That's what the toe tag's going to say. Not a heart attack. It was just a heart cramp.
Heart cramp.
Yeah. You thought foot cramp was bad.
So that was then, right? So then I pulled the plug on bodybuilding. At that point, like I literally just like, I contacted my coach, said I was in renal failure. I know I am. He was like, no, that's just from the ketogenic diet, that kind of shit. And smart guy. Like I was a medical school professor at the time. So I just basically stopped everything and just kind of worked out and things kind of went back to normal. And then the minute I fired things back up again in like the 2012 time, then it just started tanking. Like I just started feeling like crap, and then things got worse and worse.
Now, because run it back, because I mean, we obviously have done zero intro, and I'll do all this shit before, but like, how were you able to compartmentalize your profession from your hobby? Because like, there had to have been warning signs pre like the Ben Affleck afternoon special, I hope my heart doesn't cramp, wake up and piss myself in the kitchen event, that someone who may have not been as into bodybuilding, but purely academically could have looked at signs and symptoms prior to that and been like, I think we have an issue here.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to train people now on, the signs and symptoms. So yeah, the first symptoms I had were foamy urine. So, I'd be joking around with one of my PhD students. We're close to the same age because I was only 33 or 34 when I first got my job in the med school as a professor. So this guy was like 26 or 27 years old. So we were buddies, and I was standing there. I go, check this out. I have to flush the toilet like 3 times every time I pee because otherwise the foam will just like come flying out of the top of the toilet. Again, denial. Yeah. I know that's protein.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you know this in your conscious thought, and you have to suppress it, or it's like.
No, I think it's truly denial, like subconscious.
Okay.
Denial.
All right.
Like yeah, because I look back, I reflect back on even by 20 years in academia and as a professor. I wasn't thinking right. So I said to my wife, actually, we were talking the other day about it, and I said, I think my urea issues, like, so one of the problems with kidney disease is blood urea starts going up. And that's one of the reasons why you have to dialyze, is because that blood urea, when it gets to a certain level, actually causes psychosis and a whole bunch of other craziness.
Is that like what is that? That's protein? Is that what
No,
that
it's
is?
piss in your blood, is what it is. It's from protein, but like it's the waste materials of protein.
Okay.
Because we have this, like, you know, we have nitrogen and whatnot that come off, and then we end up having urea, which has ammonia in it and whatnot. And so we end up with ammonia and urea in our blood at much higher levels. It's normally there, and that's how we get rid of it through peeing. But when you stop filtering things, you can still pee. A lot of people, like I peed right up to dialysis, but it's just water. You're just getting rid of water. All the minerals and whatnot are all staying within you, as well as these metabolites. So yeah, urea is really, really hard on the brain, apparently. And it's my
Apparently.
my nephrologist asked me, like, you know, every time we had bloods and labs done, he would say to me, like, you're feeling okay, eh? Because your urea is pushing like 30, man. And then like, you know, he's like, and psychosis starts around like 20. But I didn't feel like, I felt pretty normal. And I was, you know, my wife would have let me know if things were getting sideways. But what I do believe is that the way I thought about things was completely different. And part of that is denial. Because now when I reflect and go through, you know, fully Eckhart Tolle things and go back and like try to figure out why I did things I did and why I did things a certain way I did them. And really it comes down to like this undeniable force to win at everything I do. And that's something I'm really working on. Like I've seen psychologists and all kinds of stuff about it. It's extreme perfectionism, but a lot of people use it as a humble brag. Perfectionism is fucking horrible.
Yeah.
That's why I've done so much stuff, right? So it looks good on paper, but if you actually try to piece it all together, this guy's been running all over the place doing stuff, right?
Would you change it?
I wouldn't. It's me. I'm
okay.
weird. Yeah.
Because that's always the warning, right? When people like they hear that and go, "Oh, I should probably not do that because I could end up in X, Y, or Z predicament." But it's like, yeah, you'd also be not someone worth talking to.
Do you want to know what? I wouldn't. And this isn't for bodybuilding or anything, but just life in general. The experience I've had from kidney disease, I wouldn't trade it.
Really?
No, fuck no.
Okay, so walk me through like from day one to now, like from waking up in the kitchen, making a mess of the place, to now. What is that process? Like, what is your first, like, what are the steps involved? What are like, because, you know, we have some close friends who are going through this right now.
Well, that's why I want to help these people because it's the same thing, except for now they don't have this professor job.
Right.
Right. Like I had something else that I could say, this is what I am.
Right.
But I never ever associated with it. Right. So for example, like when I went in for my transplant interviews, all the docs that I actually worked with on my transplant team, I worked with in the medical school. So these guys knew I was a professor somewhere down the line, but when they interview you, they're saying, okay, so, you know, tell me about Dwayne, like, who is he? And I always associated with being an athlete. And it was funny because we started talking about like being an athlete, and they, you know, let me know about, you know, all the risks and all the stuff about the athletic endeavors I've had and whatnot. And then it just come out that I was a biophysics professor.
Casually.
And they're like,
on my free time.
yeah, you're in medical biophysics. So it's really strange that you actually associated with being an athlete first. The brain stuff I always had, like I was just lucky. And I can't even say I picked my parents right. Like my parents didn't go off to university. My dad owned a machine shop. My mom stayed at home and took care of us. So I just kind of just followed my brain all along. And luckily enough, I was kind of knocked on the right path enough times by people, but I meandered my way over the line a few times throughout my life. And that's kind of, it's the athletics that you just like, if you, as you well know, like once you've been at that pro caliber athletics, there's a big mental component to that. There's a big, where you derive your successes from. Everything is kind of built around this kind of athletic thing you've done. And then if you want to perfect it, well, then you'll do anything at all costs. And that's motocross was my first thing, man. Like I quit because of injury. And I mean, like I've had like knee surgeries, reconstructions. I got a rod in my humerus that's in there for life. Both my biceps have been put back on. Now that's slight bodybuilding plus slight motocross because I always dealt with really bad biceps tendonitis. All these things now I'm really happy to see. Like I work out with a 21-year-old kid, and it's really cool because they actually care about that shit now.
Yeah.
Like he's like, oh no, I won't do bench press because it hurts my shoulder. And I'm like, well, I'm going back to the 90s, back when I was the strongest and felt the best. So we're going to be doing bench press. And sure enough, I start tearing my traps again and all this kind of stuff. So it's a really neat, it's an interesting ideology. I think it comes a lot from being raised by boomers, where it's like, you'll die with your boots on if your country goes to war.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just basically what you associate, like what your brain associates with.
But do you feel like that's a potential downfall for people who don't have that mentality? Like,
Like in terms of like success and
Yeah.
athletics? Yeah, man. That's why we're all nuts.
because I want Ben to bench press now. Like I want to take him and force him to bench press because it's like, no, do the hard shit.
Yeah. Like I do, I go online and I'll be doing my shoulders and I'll be doing behind the neck press. And I get fucking like 50 DMs saying like, dude, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know, man. I've been doing this for years. That's always what built my shoulders.
Yeah. And also too, like you have a tool of calibration that other people don't have. Because like, what's a shoulder to a kidney? You know what I mean? Like what's shoulder pain to like, dude, because like you got transplant.
Yeah. I got a transplant.
What was that process like? Because like you said, a transplant interview.
Yeah, it honestly, and thanks for talking about this, because I really want to raise awareness about kidney disease, because it's really a problem. People think that you get kidney disease, well then you just plug into a dialysis machine, you do an oil change.
Yeah,
right?
it's on an Oldsmobile. Like
the process. So I went through the process the fastest that you possibly can, mainly because I'm privileged to be in the medical system myself. So anybody who's out there that's been on dialysis for 5 years, please. I entered the kidney transplant crowd, or the team, or the coolness factor very easily.
Yeah.
So most people have comorbidities, like diabetes, constant hypertension. They may be obese, generally, or hyperinflammation from having, some sort of autoimmune disorder. Lupus is one of them that's very, very common. I don't have any of that. Now I do have FSGS, focal segmental glomerular sclerosis. So scarring of the glomerulus, which are the glomeruli are the basic functional units of the kidney. It's you have these nephrons in there, and it's very important for getting rid of the shit in your blood. And I was lucky enough that FSGS is also a bodybuilder, powerlifter, football player kidney disease. So if it's not familial, like if it's not something that comes from picking my parents wrong, then I'm good, because I don't plan on going down that road again, right? But if it's not, if it actually is something that I just inherited, then I may end up back on that machine one day.
Interesting. Right? So if it was like, if it was genetic and not like, let's say
so if it's primary, not secondary.
Okay.
Yeah. So secondary would be induced by exogenous factors.
Right.
Right. If it's primary, then we have 50% chance of seeing this come back.
So even if you had a transplant and it was primary, you could have had to have another transplant.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
You may see it rear its head again. Now it did take me 43 years to be diagnosed. Right. I was born premature too. I have to kind of give a disclaimer on that. This may not have been behaviors, because I wasn't really I wasn't a bad actor. Like I didn't push things over in my eyes, I didn't push things to the limit. I had a lot of friends that were doing a lot worse.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like, when your business is going bankrupt and going, well, I have a lot of friends that are going bankrupt too. Like it doesn't fucking put food on the table.
Right,
right?
Yeah.
So
we're both jumping off the building here.
Yeah, that's right. So I had that stuff going on, but basically the whole process of this thing is like, you get diagnosed, and then the day I got diagnosed, my daughter, I diagnosed myself because we had when my daughter was being born, we had a private suite and we had a midwife. So I could just kind of roam around this room. And there's all these like different, testing devices for these pregnant women. So I'm in there pissing on these like protein sticks and all this stuff. And I come out, my wife's actually in labor, and I put it in front of her. She's like, pushing. And I go, guess we got to get this looked at when we get home, eh? And it was my protein levels in my urine were just so freaking high. So that was the first kind of like, we probably have to do something with that. Then the retina detachment.
Okay, hold on. I got to back up to that thought process. Like, all right, she might forget about this later. Like, what's the thought process of being like, now seems like a good time?
Oh, I'm king of the timing.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm the worst.
So that's your MO.
It's the way my mind works.
Okay.
I talk to my wife. Like I'll be sitting there like cooking something, and I'll be like, yeah, it's probably a good idea to go there tomorrow. I'll probably do that. And she'll be like, go where? Like, did you just have a conversation? And
now I'm just tuning into this now. Okay.
Yeah. So that's just me. I just do this.
So self-diagnosed.
And then a few days later, we have we've got a kid at home. Retinas start detaching at the because it's in. So she was born in end of August. So this is grant season now, right? So I'm writing grants in my office and everything, and retina started detaching, like I was talking about before. And then that's when I basically went into the hospital, and then they ran like 14 vials of bloods, and then just let me go. And I'm like, you're not going to give me anything for this blood pressure? And they're like, well, we got to find out what it is. Sure. So I was actually at a funeral for my wife's cousin, and I got a phone call that was like on my cell phone that was like, you need to get into a dialysis unit like right away. And I'm like, holy shit. So we kind of finished up the festivities there and headed home. And then that's when I first met with my nephrologist. It was like, basically, you know the gravity of the situation. And I'm like, so how long do I have before I need to like get a transplant or be on dialysis? And he said, a month. And then I said to him, okay, give me the month though to turn this around. So we did bloods weekly for the month. And I just basically like shut her down. So he was like, well, your testosterone looks a little high here. We might want to deal with that. So that's when I just like basically went home, and it was like those days were done. Yeah. And then we, and then I just basically over the month, I managed to start turning things around. So I was imminent transplant or dialysis. So I was stage 5 end stage renal failure. And I brought it back to stage 4 within the month, which is changing diet, taking my protein down to, like 50 grams a day, that kind of stuff. And then from there, it just got better and better and better. Actually, I started to have some kidney regeneration. So as humans, we lose about 1% of our kidney function per year. But with kidney disease, you could lose 10, 15, 20%. You could lose it all in 1 year. So generally speaking, you'll see your kidney function will decline year by year. With kidney disease, it falls fast. It's like a runaway train. For me, I actually didn't have any change in my kidney function for 7 years. I got it to stage 3, like the very touching stage 3, and I kept it there. And then my nephrologist was always like, we could do this for 15, 20 years now, man. This is amazing. Like, you got to write a book. I'll write the forward for it. So I am working on that.
So you originally went from having to get dialysis and a transplant within a month,
within a month.
7 years.
Yeah, I held off for 7 years.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And then in 2019, I was at the Olympia, gave talks. I was on top of the world, felt great, 185 pounds, lean. World was my oyster. Felt awesome. Had to really watch my potassium because that was the big problem. Because I wasn't filtering out potassium, and if you have too much on board, you'll have a heart attack.
The old heart cramp.
The old heart cramp.
You'll get
an old heart cramp. Yeah. So we ended up. It ended up going really well, and then it literally the runaway train started. It was like September. It was dysfunction. Actually, no. What was funny was my nephrologist told me. He said I went in and we were going every 6 months for visits now, and he's like, you're looking great. Everything. He goes, maybe you should do some bloods. And I'm like, why bother? Like, everything's going well. He goes, no, let's just do something. On the way out, just go to the lab, do some bloods. And if there's a problem, I'll contact you. So I did them and I left. And I got a phone call as soon as I got home, just like 10 minutes away. And he's like, I'm sending an ambulance. Where are you right now? And I'm like, why? What's up? I'm going to train legs. And he's like, well, don't go anywhere. He said, your potassium's through the roof. It's like 7.
What's normal?
Normal, if you keep it below 5, you're doing okay. If you start creeping into 5, 6, you're in trouble. 7, you're like imminent danger.
Someone's sending an ambulance.
Yeah. So I told him, I said, listen, I'll just come in. I feel fine. Like, I don't feel any arrhythmias. He trusted me because I was a doctor too, and I work in cardiovascular. So I got in, and as soon as I got there was a nurse that met me at the door, ran me in. They started running an ECG on me, and they showed me it, and I couldn't believe it. Like, I had these inverted T waves and all this. It was a mess. So they basically, they do this procedure where they run this glucose in you, and then they hit it with insulin. And the whole idea is that when you do this, the insulin and glucose actually basically sequester the potassium and minerals and whatnot. And they take them from the fluid compartment into the muscle compartment. And the idea is that you're going to take that potassium and put it back where it should be, right? So they did that, but I told them, I said, listen, I'm ketogenic right now. And I haven't had a freaking carb, like more than 50 grams of carbs for like, months. And they're like, oh no, this is a standard procedure. And I'm like, and I said, how much insulin are you going to give me? They're like 10 IUs. And I'm like, yeah, you might want to cut that in half. Anyway, so they give me the glucose, chase it with the insulin. And within like minutes, I'm going like, I'm feeling weird. And then it was like, get the dextrose. And my wife grabs the ball of dextrose, injects me. She's a nurse. And I came back. And my blood was 2 millimolar glucose, which is like right on brain damage. So,
Yeah,
so these are the kind of, these are
most
kind
guys
of,
are waking
these are
up
kind of,
fasted at 5.
that's right.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of crazy things that kind of happen with this, right? And it was at that point that I pushed it. It was like, that was like in October, November. And then we had to do blood tests every week, and then it just kept falling and falling and falling. And I kept saying to him, well, I'm getting a transplant before I'm on dialysis. So I made it to December. My GFR was 4.
Normal is?
Normal, well, a good one's, 100 and change.
So that's bad. That's what you're telling me. That's not
my
good.
GFR now is like 98 to 103.
You were at 4?
Yeah.
That's
And
not good.
yeah, things start getting really shitty after 20. Like when you get, they get really bad in the 20s, but you can muckle under. But yeah, so it was at that point where I was like, you know what? I can do this Pop-Tarts and cornflakes, like no problem for like a lot longer. So I want to see if I can get the transplant before. And my nephrologist was like, okay, whatever. And then a day later, he was like, listen, I'm just going to throw a catheter in and get you cleaned up there just a little bit. You get your blood a little cleaned up. So again, denial, right?
Right.
Like I work in this area. Like this is what I do. I'm a surgeon that works on microvessels in these type of organs. So I'm like, okay. So I come in and I'm thinking they're literally going to put like, I'm so in denial. I think they're going to put a catheter like in my, wrist and like flush the blood out a little bit and then see you later, boss. Right.
So he didn't want to use the word dialysis.
No.
But that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. Because he knew I was waiting for this transplant, but he also knew that my first transplant donor was flaked out.
Oh, shit.
I didn't know this. They can't tell you that.
So he comes in, we're just going to clean things up.
Yeah, we're just going to clean her up here. Yeah. And he throws
Yeah.
it. Then the next thing you know, I'm laying in this gurney and they're throwing a freaking chest catheter into my, atrium.
Does it register then that this is not just getting cleaned up? That like once they get the PICC line right into the heart that you're like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So then it settles in.
Well, it settled in, but I was kind of like, okay, next challenge, right? Like I just got to get off this fucking machine before I was even on it. And then they rolled me on the gurney into like the dialysis unit, and people have like no legs or fucking eyes are patched, and they're all like full of sores and all this shit.
It's a leper colony.
It was horrible. And so I'm like, this is terrible. So they clean me up, and I'm like, when do I have to come back? They're like, in 2 days. And I'm like, is this like happening like all the time? Like, yeah, it's every other day, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the rest of your life until you get a transplant. I'm like, fuck. That's when it set in. Yeah. Well, then it was nice because my nephrologist had already set me up with the home hemo program. And so my wife and I passed that with flying colors because of what we do. Had the machine at home, and that was all great. And then I just worked on getting a donor, and my best buddy just kind of stepped up from university and was like, I got to do this for you. He came and visited me, and the machine crashed while I was on it. And that just, he saw my daughter running up and my wife panicking, calling the hospital. I was just kind of like, it's no big deal. There's only like 150 mils of blood in that machine.
Right.
But that really affected him. And then, and then the blessing started. He actually came, he's from Gananoque, and he came in and just stayed at my house and got all the testing done. Like my nephrologist was like, we'll get him done quickly, because the COVID thing had stopped transplants from happening because they're elective surgery, right? So well, you do elect to do it. A lot of people won't get a transplant. They just say, "Oh, I'll be on the machine for the rest of my life."
Really?
Yeah. Some people off that.
Fillet me like a fucking salmon.
Right? Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
insane.
Yeah. So from there, that's just we went through all the stages, and then the next thing you know, the following following October, we had a date. Didn't know the date was coming until about a month before it. But yeah, we got it, squeezed it in between the two pandemic spikes, and literally squeezed it in. And then the rest is history. And it was a year ago in October.
Holy shit, eh?
Yeah.
How long were you on the table for?
I think it was about a 6-hour surgery. It's not
Which
too
one
bad.
did they, I'm always curious as to which one they choose. How do they pick? Is there one that's more damage?
Well, they don't pick
than
one
the
from
other?
me.
Well, yeah,
Mine
but like,
are just in there getting shriveled up.
but like, they remove one.
No, they don't. No, those things are.
Oh my God, wait, you're blowing my mind right now. What is happening? You just have
like
these,
my kidneys in my gut.
your
So if
kidney
I
or
let-
his?
Oh, sorry. The one I stole from my buddy.
But yours are still in there? Mm-hmm. So it's not really a transplant. Because transplant would be like, I'm taking this tree and I'm going to put it over here and I'm going to remove. You have one kidney and 2 vestigial things.
Yeah, I probably dried up. I was hoping that they actually added to things, so I was still peeing with them when I had my transplant.
That is archaic. That seems archaic to me.
Oh, you want to talk archaic? They hook it up. So they put it in your gut, and they hook it up to the iliac artery, right? Which is the one that runs it. It runs in your femoral artery and then puts blood flow to your legs. So they obviously hooked it up to my right one, because when I bend over and tie my shoes for too long, my whole leg goes numb. And I told him, oh yeah, that happens. Yeah. Oh man, this is literally like it's a phase 1 clinical trial. Like when you have nothing left, no other options.
This
Like
is the YOLO kidney transplant.
That's right. Yeah.
That's insane. I would have thought this would have been more proceduralized.
Well, it's proceduralized.
But like you're in there, let's take the 2 vestigial things.
It's too risky. Like because they come in like because the so first of all like it's risky to go in there and start unhooking all these pipes.
Right.
That are already like they're basically they're directly connected to your aorta and your vena cava. Right. So there's a lot of blood going through that sucker. Like your full cardiac output's going through there. Right. So there's that. And then there's a vessel issue, right? Because when the kidney comes out of my buddy Mark and comes to me, they have to like surgically remove it, and there's going to be a certain length of vessel on there. There's biological variability, right? So there's that. So in my case, like what they do is they actually look at the donors, and they kind of come up with like which kidney is probably functioning the best. They look at blood flow through them and everything, and which kidney has the best access to the vessels. And so in my case, I got the smaller of the 2 kidneys that Mark had. Because of access to the vessels. And he joked around and said, you got the shitty one, but I actually have the better one because my GFR is better than his now. But
actually?
Yeah, and I feel bad every time I fucking call him.
Yeah, you should.
I feel horrible.
That's terrible.
I feel so bad.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, so I have this organ that's in my belly now. So I have to be careful like where I put my seatbelt and all that kind of stuff, right? Because if you get in a crash, like you got to protect this thing, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have like the kind of same processes that are around it.
I thought it was literally like, okay, there's a kidney here. We got marks here. We're going to pull this one. We're going to put that in a bucket, and we're going to put marks here.
No, they even pull marks out of his belly through like a laparoscopic procedure, which is like, it's like his kidney, his scar is only about that big.
How big is his kidney?
Well, it'd be like, the size of your fists or whatever, right? Yeah, a little bigger.
That's insane to me.
Yeah.
We've had medicine for that long, and this is where we're at.
Oh, dude, you should see the dialysis machines that were sitting in the hospital saying that this is an old dialysis machine from 1980. And you're thinking to yourself like, oh, it's like a box, big stainless steel thing with like mechanical pumps. There's no computerized anything on it. Like you're looking at this thing thinking like, how can that even be sterile? It's too big. Like, how do you get that thing sterile before you put my blood through it and then throw it back in me?
That's insane.
Yeah. But it's just a fridge filter anyway. Like the machine looks fancy now, but it's just, all it is a thing with a peristaltic pump on it that takes the blood out of here or out of your fistula if you have one and goes into this like fridge filter. And then there's buffers and they're basically buffers that go through in there. And that's what removes your potassium and your, calcium and all that kind of stuff, phosphorus.
Was there any part of the process that surprised you? Like obviously being so close to it from an academic perspective, but also being so removed from it, just like out of pure denial. Was there any point like where the denial kicked in and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize this is how this works? Or did like, once you kind of like, oh, the cleaning up my blood is actually dialysis, I know the playbook now?
No, I actually denied the dialysis part. And when I had it, I had them actually put the machine like right by my studio so I could actually still do stuff, work and everything. I realized pretty quickly that like it basically is like getting a lobotomy for 4 hours. Like you feel like you're like it's, oh dude, your eyes are all glazed. It's just,
what is doing that? Like what about that process is making
the
you
nurses
feel...
call it disequilibrium.
Okay, so it's a pressure and volume thing?
No. They're talking like, I think they're talking disequilibrium with the with basically your minerals and everything else. So what you're doing is you're stripping your blood of everything that filter has a cutoff point for.
Okay.
Right? Including testosterone, like your hormones, including your, all the minerals and everything you need to get rid of. But you got to remember, you're going to start with like a minimal amount now. So it's almost like being like dehydrated and stripped of like neurochemicals and everything during this period of time.
So it would be like hypokalemic or something, where you just be like,
and you'd be going from hyperkalemic to hypokalemic.
Yeah, that'd be a problem.
Yeah, and speaking of which, it was funny because we had this like, so you control your potassium levels with the buffer that you use. And one time they gave us the wrong buffer and I didn't actually check. Like you're supposed to check. And I was just, every morning I start early, do the same thing every morning. I threw it on there, and I threw a high potassium one on there because a lot of people will filter potassium even though they're not filtering other stuff
right.
with disease. And that was a bad one. I started having these arrhythmias, well, because it would have put my potassium through the roof, right? Because I'm supposed to be removing it. I was adding it
Heart
back
cramp.
in. Yeah. I was getting some heart cramps. And we couldn't figure out what it was. And at the end, when I was cleaning up the machine, I looked at my wife and I go, check this out. We thought it was the catheter like wiggling around in my chest because I used to see if I could get break a world record trying to clean my blood the most if I could. So I turned the pump up as high as I could get it without it throwing alarms. And I'd sit there and tweak it for like 4 hours up and down.
Meanwhile, you're just pumping in high potassium.
At that point, yeah. So it's a, like I said, it's a phase 1 clinical trial. Like there's nobody going to say like when you die of kidney disease, they're not going to be like, oh man, we don't know what happened. That's what I told my wife. Like it's going to be like, well, his kidneys failed.
Yeah.
You die of kidney failure.
At any point in that process, did you feel like, because like
I'm never going to die. If you're going to ask me how I feel, like, no, I honestly, I wasn't scared one bit.
So like you get the call, hey man, don't go do legs because it'll be your last quad extension you ever do. We're going to send an ambulance. You're just like, nah. Like,
yeah, I was like, yeah, because I always had this thing in life that you're going to know you're going to die before you die.
Okay.
Like, even if it's a split second. And what I do is it's really cool. I use this, Eckhart Tolle kind of makes you do this. He's basically, if you read The Power of Now, it's explained like the past is just rumination. The future is just fake. Like time is a construct. And both of those exist in different points in time, but the only time that actually exists is the present.
Right.
And not being like super duper philosophical, I looked at that and what he would say is, when you're feeling overwhelmed about the past or present, think right now, is there a problem? Like right this fucking second, is there a problem? And if you do that every second of your day, there's actually never a problem.
Right.
So when do you ever die? Like it's kind of a crazy kind of,
so you're
it's not even metaphysical.
You're gonna send that bucket down the well once, and then you're gonna have a little note that says problem, and then it's gonna be over. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. So with the kidney disease thing, right? It worked that way. And then as soon as you know if there's a problem, right, then you got to spend your time unfucking yourself.
Right.
You can't like keep repeating the same mistake and expect a different outcome, right? Like, so for me, it was like just a matter of, okay, I got to change things, right? So, I was 260 pounds when I got diagnosed. I took myself down to 168, and which they said was impossible, and it was pretty easy. I managed to maintain like a hell of a lot more muscle mass than I thought. And the reason why I did it wasn't for aesthetics at all. I worked out every single day through every minute of my disease. Even to the point where it took me 3 hours to do a normal workout that was 45 minutes because I was throwing up between sets. But the point was this: I had these countermeasures like sauna and all these things. And the idea behind it is that if you kind of control your environment as much as you can, then you don't have to worry about anything coming in and striking you from the side. They're measuring your blood, right? You're measuring your blood pressure 3 or 4 times a day. And I had a home blood lab that I could use anytime I wanted to, which was a fortunate thing of being in, medicine. I wasn't scared one bit. Apparently my wife was though. She let me know that in the last couple of months. I wasn't actually afraid.
Really?
Yeah. The part that going back to what you asked about, what was like going through the transplant process, the part that was probably the biggest like wake up call, which was denial 2, was the fact that like I go in for this transplant. It was COVID, so no one's there with you, right? You're just by yourself. And I go in, and when I woke up, I'd snuck my phone in, and when I woke up in recovery, I just kind of slipped it out and took a picture to see what I looked like. And I was like, holy fuck. Like, I got catheters coming out my jugular. I got them in my radial artery. I got them, like, I got catheters coming out every orifice in my body. Like,
$6 million man.
Like literally everything but my anus, right? Had something stuck up the end of the hole, and they made holes if you didn't. Had one in my gut for draining. Like, so I took a picture and I put it on Instagram, and it's still there. And I said, "Who wants to train legs?" It was like a Friday or whatever, right? And that's how my wife found out that I had my transplant.
What?
Yeah.
Would you like go out for a pack of smokes and just get your kidneys? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, she was pretty pissed about it. I took it.
Yeah.
She's like, she's like,
so.
Like, that morning, because this is like, it was dark out when I took the picture. It was at least dark in the room, in the recovery room. That morning I got a text. She's like, "Do you realize I just found out that your transplant was successful by you asking the rest of the world if they want to train legs?" And my face all bloated. So so that part kind of surprised me. Like laying there, like in ICU with like beep, 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 and everything like all around me. Like I've had 10, 12 surgeries in my life for musculoskeletal.
Right.
So I was used to kind of that stuff, but I wasn't used to the fact that like everything had a catheter in it.
But there was no like there was no thought of mortality at that point.
No.
Really?
I was pissed that my blood pressure was so high, but because they forgot to give me my beta blocker because they didn't have it in stock. And I'm not kidding. And you get rebound hypertension when you just drop a beta blocker off.
Right.
So they're all running around trying to figure it out. I'm like, guys, you haven't given me my blood pressure meds for freaking 2 days now.
Yeah.
You know? So once we got that on board, everything was fine. Yeah, no, I didn't. No, I just wanted to get the fuck out of there, to be honest. It was like 5 days. Like at day 3, they're like, if you don't take a shit, you're not going to be getting out of here. So I'm like, finally, I'm like, okay, I took a shit, get me some food. I didn't. Yeah. Then when I ate, I finally went to the washroom, and then there was, and then I just got out. The day I got out, it was funny because the day before I got out, we got together with my donor, my buddy, and the 2 wives, and we got a picture taken. And when I came out, Mark was like, he's like, dude, I honestly thought you were going to keel over and die the way you're walking. But it's because the kidneys in your gut, and they cut your abs open, right? And it's this big incision that runs right along your pubic bone and then up your side. And my kidney was like hanging out, like I had it in my hand. Like I was walking slowly because it was coming out my belly, you know? So the next day I get out, or maybe 2 days later I get out, and I was like, screw this, I'm doing a 5K walk the minute I get to this hospital. We made her about a K, and then I had to turn around just because it was getting a little painful. But other than that, it felt great. I never had any fear of anything.
Now, what's been like the follow-ups since? Like, what is...
It's similar.
Like, what's prognosis?
Yeah, so the prognosis, I mean, could be up to 50 years with this thing. I think the longest is a 60-year transplant.
Wow.
Yeah. 12 years is the average, but you got to understand that like most people are very, very sick. It's like, I'm making light of this situation a lot, but it's not a light situation for a lot. Yeah. Even with my condition, I'm just a weird guy. Like I
think we got that.
Yeah, I
think we got that with, hey, I'm going out for a loaf of bread, and then also getting my transplant and not telling anyone.
Well, that happened. That the university really hated that. Yeah. Because I didn't even tell them I was getting a transplant, and then I get a letter from the dean. So yeah, we were surprised to hear that you got a transplant on Instagram.
Just tag them. Just tag them. Tag them in the post.
I think I did tag.
So tag the vice promo or something like that. But like day to day now versus like pre-post. Because like it seems like in the moment there's never a problem, but like if you were to look retrospectively versus like your day to day life now versus like 3 years ago, can you look back and be like, oh fuck, like
oh yeah, no, like I haven't felt like this since in my 20s.
Really?
No, I was sick for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I feel amazing, and the drugs are heavy. Like I kind of skipped out on them before this talk because they do kind of make you feel a little bit special, like you're a little bit weird for about. I'd say if I take them at 10. I feel weird till about noon, 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Hey man, that's a small price to pay for a miracle. It's
yeah, that is wild.
It's a miracle. Like I wouldn't be doing this right now, right? Like when I gave talks, I had to do them between a certain period of time because I got really sick.
Really?
Yeah.
Now what's like more comprehensive follow-ups now? Like what is like, is it a monthly? Is it weekly? Like,
yeah, so it was similar to when I first got the disease. When I first got it, I was getting weekly, and they do the same thing. It's like weekly, then it's like bi-weekly, then it's once a month, then it's once every 2 or 3 months, and it depends on your progress, obviously. And then now I'm up to every 6 months. I see them. So, and I don't even see them. I haven't seen a doc since COVID because, during the acute phase of the transplant, I was seeing docs. But now that things are under control and with my background and everything, we just kind of talk on the phone. Like I dropped my beta blocker out like a few months ago, and I told them, now that the kidney's working well, my blood pressure is perfectly fine. They're like, okay, no problem. So we've got a nice working relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's a miracle.
How prevalent do you think this is, and people don't even realize?
In our friends?
Yeah, like in
Huge.
our like.
Huge.
Okay.
That's why we're seeing what we're seeing right now, right? That's why the guys are like 40 years old. It's wear and tear from the past. Like I said, there's all these predispositions that you can have. Like me, I was born significantly premature, which they know my kidneys were underdeveloped. I chose the wrong sport. With underdeveloped kidneys, but I never knew that when I was doing it, right? Yeah. I didn't know it until they actually ultrasounded my kidneys. So, some people find out they have one kidney. Yeah. And they didn't even know they had that.
That's frank.
Yeah, right.
Now, what is like, because clearly like bodybuilding is what bodybuilding is, and that's not going to change. What are things that people can do preemptively? Or like what are early signs and symptoms, or what what should be like a standard, if you were to write like a standard operating procedure for, okay, we understand the risks that come with performance enhancing drugs. We understand it's a part of the sport. You know, you should be doing this routinely. Like you should be taking these blood labs, this, you know, every 6 months, every 3 months, every month. You should be avoiding this. You should be looking for these signs and symptoms. Like what are the big, if you were to write like a manual for how to do this and also avoid or mitigate the potential risks, what should people be looking for?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously people are a lot smarter, and I think they're smarter now. I don't know if they are. Take blood work's key.
Okay.
So I work with a dozen different bodybuilders, pro bodybuilders, helping them out with their blood work. So I'm the guy that doesn't like get them on stage, but I'm the guy that actually after on stage gets them fixed up so they're not like, you know, causing detriment. And one of the things I tell every one of them is measure your blood pressure. Don't go in denial on your blood pressure. Don't say, oh, the cuff's too small, so that's why I'm fucking high.
I had a coffee beforehand.
I had a coffee.
Yeah, I was a little stressed out.
Little stress.
Traffic was crazy.
Ate too much. Yeah. Measure your blood pressure 3 times a day. If you're a smart bodybuilder, you'd measure it morning, noon, and night.
Really?
Yeah.
And we're still 120 over 80 is kind of the...
Yeah, like you want to be that or under. But if you're in the 120s as a guy that's over 250 pounds, 230 pounds, whatever, you're doing well. You know, if you're keeping it under 130 systolic, diastolic doesn't usually change much. If anything, it'll go down because diastolic pressure is determined by the amount of energy stored in the elastic vessels when the heart's relaxing. So what happens is like during systole, the top number of blood pressure, that's the ejection of blood. So that's your highest pressure because that's going to be where the most energy is put into the system, right? So out in the aorta. When you measure it around your arm, that's your surrogate for aortic pressure because it's the same height, around the same height. And it's really close. So the resistance is pretty minimal between the two places because they're conduit, big vessels. What I generally see is like systole starts going up and diastole starts going down in bodybuilders. And that's because as our vessels start to get hardened, they store less energy. So the potential energy doesn't get stored in the elastin of the aorta during diastole, but rather gets put into as kinetic energy during systole. So you see higher amounts of pressure because it's not buffered by that compliance of the big vessels.
So that would be someone like, there's been cases recently of like left ventricular hypertrophy, which is like, there can be eccentric and concentric.
That's another whole other problem.
Okay, how would that manifest in blood pressure issues?
What happens with blood pressure with hypertrophy is actually your heart becomes inefficient.
Okay.
Because if you look at like the law of well, we won't even go into physical laws, but basically the thicker the heart, the ventricle gets, right? The volume also tends to go down a little bit. But, and this is during like Valsalvas and that kind of stuff, that kind of enlarging of the heart. It's not the same as a runner who has an enlarged heart. Okay? Right. This is a more muscular heart in bodybuilders and powerlifters. So you end up with a thicker ventricle. And then when you have that thick ventricle, then the heart becomes actually inefficient. So in that case, you'll actually start seeing heart failure when it gets bad, where you're not creating enough pressure.
Okay.
And that's another problem in itself. But when we're talking about like kidney failure, generally what we see is hypervolemic, volume overload. So your body's not getting rid of blood volume. The other problem, the reason why I say measure pressure is because if you're using any sort of anabolics, especially androgens, we'll see hematocrit. So the percentage of your red blood cells in plasma goes up, which means that your blood has more stuff in it, right? Because blood is like plasma and stuff. And the red cells make up the biggest proportion of stuff. And when we talk about hematocrit, it should sit around, 40. That's 40% of your blood volume is red blood cells. And what we usually see in a lot of bodybuilders and strength athletes that are using PEDs, it goes up into like the 50s, maybe approaching 60. And red blood cells they're non-Newtonian, but how they work. But the problem with them is when we get too many of them, then they stop having these interesting properties that red blood cells have, so pressure goes up.
So it's like you're pushing Heinz ketchup through there.
Well, actually, yeah, you are. Well, okay, so yeah, so Heinz ketchup actually is non-Newtonian too, so it's kind of cool. So if you take if you take ketchup and put it on a plate, like when you squeeze it out, right?
I'm more nervous where this is going, but okay.
It's like thick,
Yeah.
right? But if you wiggle it around on the plate like this and create some shear forces,
Okay.
it actually thins. Like you'll start seeing like the tomato part separate from the water,
Okay.
right? People are gonna try this.
Yeah.
If you put it on a plate, like if you put a blob of ketchup on a plate and then tip it up, as it slides down the plate, it'll start sliding faster and faster and faster because of the shear forces. So it's the opposite of cornstarch and water, where it's also non-Newtonian, where it becomes thicker as you create shear.
Right.
Blood becomes thinner as you create shear.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, this is what I teach in biophysics, and it's such a remarkable element in the body because of this fact. But the problem is, as we push the red blood cell volume up too much, or the particulate matter in the blood, it starts to lose those shear thinning properties.
So it becomes more
sludgy.
Newtonian.
Becomes sludgy.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it doesn't become more Newtonian. It's just that there's so much interaction between the platelets and the red blood cells that it becomes thick.
Gotcha. And that's where you start running into issues.
Yeah, viscosity goes way up.
I gotcha.
Yeah, so blood pressure. That's why blood pressure is really important. And the reason why blood pressure is really important is because those nephrons that we were talking about earlier in the body, in the kidney, have really small capillaries, and they don't like spikes in pressure.
Gotcha.
So we don't know whether it's mean pressure, systolic pressure that they're reading that's damaging them. But when systole's up, around like 160, 180 millimeters of mercury, we know that we're causing kidney damage.
Because it's just getting obliterated, like these smaller blood vessels in the nephrons of the kidneys are just getting blasted with way too much pressure.
Way
and
too
these
much
capillaries
pressure. Yeah.
are just
Pressure and flow. Yeah.
Okay, so blood pressure is a good proxy for, because pressure
Absolutely.
would go up if hematocrit was going up, pressure would go up if systolic pressure is going
Absolutely.
up, and then that was likely just blasting through the nephrons in the kidneys, which filter.
You got it. Yeah. So and there's a number of neurogenic factors too that occur with high uses of anabolics and whatnot that cause increases in sympathetic nerve activity, and that's also that's your stress response. Yeah. So you'll see that sympathetic nerve activity in humans goes up as we increase the number of androgens on board. So we have that problem too. So we're always kind of in a state of emergency. At least our nervous system is. We may not be. So that's the first thing. So blood pressure is key. Regular blood work is like really key. I just had an athlete have to get $650 worth of blood work, like 14 or 15 vials. But the thing is, if you don't keep your eye on the blood work, that's where the big problems really start happening. So obviously a kidney panel would be the best thing to get. So that's like electrolytes, GFR, creatinine, these kind of things.
And that would be blood work still, not like a urine analysis?
Blood work and urine. So it's called labs.
Okay.
Yeah, so you should have like blood work and urine. If you see any protein in your urine, you're in trouble. And that might be just the start of it. You might show perfect GFR, but you have some protein in there. There's not supposed to be protein registering on a dipstick at least.
So, and I think an issue that people have is like accessibility. Like they don't know what to ask for, or like physicians might not know the potential ramifications. Like if I were to go into my doctor, what would I tell them?
Tell them you want a physical with a kidney and liver panel.
Okay.
Yeah, and that way they'll do like a CBC, so a complete blood count. So you get all those things like hematocrit and all the stuff that I talked about. And then you want to get your kidney panel. It's going to include all the electrolytes. It's going to include your creatinine levels. If you're super duper muscle bound, I'd suggest paying for a cystatin C measurement because creatinine is body weight dependent. So especially muscle dependent. So if you're muscle bound, you end up with high creatinine levels, which could be you shouldn't have super high ones anyway, but it can still be a false positive if you train legs the day before or anything like that.
Right.
If you take creatine, it turns into creatinine, that kind of stuff.
So a lot of people might just get their high creatinine, because I've seen this with friends and not really knowing what I'm looking at, but they've seen high creatinine levels
and everything else is fine.
And they just assume while you work out. So they kind of ignore the high creatinine levels.
Yeah, so high being still within like a range that your GFR is not plummeting, right?
But the other tests that you were saying would devoid of activity, devoid of muscle mass, would still be a more true positive.
Yeah, cystatin C for people that are muscle bound is a much better indicator of GFR.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then from like a habit standpoint, like, maybe people aren't at the point where they feel like that's necessary, but they want to preemptively like strike this from a nutrition, from sleep, from supplementation. Like what have been like either what got you from stage 5 to borderline stage 3, and is it the same activities or behaviors that you're doing now, like a year post-op?
Yeah. So what? In order, so there's drastic measures that need to be taken when you're diagnosed with like severe kidney failure.
Right.
One of them is dropping your protein, and protein, has been shown to not cause problems in healthy people,
Right.
but these aren't healthy people. And this is where the biggest problem happens, I think, with most people that are in power sports and whatnot that require protein, is saying, okay, now I'm not going to be this big guy for a little bit. I need to like enter into a different arena right now. And part of that is most guys it's losing 100 pounds.
Wow.
So I lost 100, or like 90. Probably 50 to 60 of it was muscle. But for me, what I did was, and if anybody ever goes back in my early posts on what I was doing, was I was creating a reservoir of branched chain amino acids by building muscle while I was while I was in kidney failure. And the point was that the whole, having muscle mass is great when you are sick with it, because it will waste. Your body will use it, because you can't maintain 200 or 300 grams of protein a day, and expect to get better. So dropping your protein is kind of the key, and dropping your caloric intake so that you can actually shrink down. Because remember, your GFR is reliant on the amount of shit you produce in your body, right? And when you're big, you have more metabolic activity and more stuff to metabolize. So you have a lot more crap, more junk to deal with. So you have to minimize that. You have to think like your kidneys. That's what I always tell people. Think like your kidneys. Like when you're eating something, you have to think about like, what is this going to do in the next 3 or 4 hours to my body? And it's not the same thing as when you're thinking, I'm going to build muscle. In this case, now you want to preserve muscle as long as possible, because it is going to waste. If you end up on dialysis, which you will, that machine just eats branched chain amino acids for lunch.
Really?
Yeah. So you think of it less as building, a body that's aesthetic. It'll be aesthetic as a side effect, but you're actually building a body now to circumvent frailty, because that is what actually causes the problems with kidney disease.
So
frailty.
If you took two people like in equal stages of kidney dysfunction or failure, and one has more muscle than the other to start, the person with more muscle is probably going to have a better time of it, because it's just more.
They'll have a better outcome.
Okay.
Absolutely. As long as that muscle, as long as they understand that they have to make some changes in their life, like, if they're muscle bound, right?
Yeah.
If they're big guys, like, all of us guys have been, you have to change things. You have to expect that you have to get smaller. Because like I said, if your denominator is body weight, the smaller that number, for say GFR, for example. So if your kidney function is reliant on body weight, and that's the denominator of the equation, that body weight, the higher that number is, the more you're dividing out your GFR.
Right.
Right. So that's what I thought about. That's the first thing I thought of. I thought, okay, so this is a body weight dependent measure. So if I reduce my body weight by 50%, 40%, 30%, then I should be able to increase or at least decrease the amount of shit that's in my blood that I have to get rid of with these dysfunctional kidneys.
Could that potentially be the benefit behind some old school bodybuilding practices where guys used to just get smaller in like off season? Like the old like Sean Ray days, or like, yeah, I'd train for 6 months for a show and then I wouldn't work out for 6 months. Like, would that be potentially a beneficial approach to like health and aesthetics, like not going full bore? Like, we have, there's guys in this gym that bulk well over 300 pounds in an off season. Like,
back in the 90s, like people didn't do the blast and cruise stuff.
Yeah.
As much anyway. Like the general pop didn't.
Right.
Like the amateurs. Nowadays it seems like people are like, doing. I'll say like, okay, I'm PEDs. No, I'm just doing TRT. Okay, so how much are you doing? 450 milligrams a week. I'm like, well, that's 400 milligrams more than TRT a week.
Yeah. But you think it's relative to like the 10 grams they were taking before that. I'm taking nothing.
No, but I take 7 grams. Yeah.
It's testosterone, not trend replacement therapy,
That's right?
Yeah, the laundry list of like 7 different compounds that people take. What about like hydration, things like basic shit? Like, is there like an equation for people who are into working out?
Yeah. So kind of back to the whole idea. So of how do you know if you have kidney disease? So pressure, Foamy urine's another one. So if you start noticing that like the foam in your urine's making, like, when you pee, when you get halfway through, if it's making like a
And you feel
sound,
compelled to go get someone, be like, yo, Lundy, check this out.
check
Check this out, dog.
Exactly, right? Yeah, foamy urine's a big indicator of protein in your urine, like a lot. I had 20 grams of protein in my urine. Like it was a protein shake. I was wasting my money.
You bottle it.
Yeah. So you'll start seeing foam in your urine, blood pressure start creeping up. You'll wake up in the morning with like baggy, kind of black eyes, little signs like that. That's when you need to actually go and get that blood work done ASAP.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you get your blood work done, like, 3 times a year, and you're taking your blood pressure 2 to 3 times a day. And the reason why I say that is because then you can see the effects of your day on your stress and everything.
Right.
Like some people have really low blood pressure in the morning, some have higher. Some people's blood pressure gets higher and higher and higher throughout the day. You can then understand how your body reacts. And if you have no symptoms, get into that habit, because then when you start seeing things change, you can go back to the drawing board and say, okay, why are these things changing, right?
Right. Now, you get a lot of people reach out to you for this kind of thing?
Yeah, I've got lots of guys, lots of girls, lots of women too.
Really? What's the best way for people to reach out and contact you?
They can contact me on Instagram
Okay.
at DRD and Jackson.
Okay.
And usually it starts out with a DM and get to know the person. And I weigh up whether the person really wants help or they just want to believe that they're getting help because they're
Right.
talking to me, which is a totally different thing.
Well, you can empathize with that.
Oh, absolutely.
From one denier to the next.
One denier to the next. Yeah. And I can read it too. You can't fool a fooler.
Right. You can't bullshit, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. I think this is something that, it's been scary. Like, I did the Generation Iron podcast a few weeks ago, and I was just like, your Instagram page, like the Generation Iron Instagram page, is a bodybuilding obituary. That's what it was for, like,
the last year.
Yeah, the last year. It seemed like, we lost like a few.
Dallas McCarver started a few years ago, and
Yeah.
it kind of just
It's
on rolling.
it's an odd one. What's his name passed there just before, I think, the Tampa Pro this year.
Yep.
And it's like, and the show still went on, which was crazy to me.
They always
Like,
do.
Which is, and
They
it's-
always do.
Again, maybe you can't bullshit, but it's scary to think that, like, the frequency and the magnitude, because the level of competition is so high, right? That, like, people are, it's a sport where it's like you don't get a trophy for taking less, right? You don't get a trophy for being the guy on stage who's not taking the most amount of gear. So it is crazy to think that, like,
But you do get a trophy for being the healthiest guy, because your body won't lie, right? Your body won't, your physique will not lie if you're healthy or not.
yeah,
And the more healthy the bodybuilder is, the better their skin looks, the better their eyes look, the better everything looks. And that, the whole thing's an illusion, right? So when you have these judges that are looking at you, even if they're not saying, is this guy's eyes jaundiced?
right,
Or, is this guy got like massive varicose veins because of, vascular dysfunction in the bottom of his legs? Like when you start seeing like big puffy varicose veins and these massive veins in the lower extremities, you have venous insufficiency.
yeah,
They're not doing their job. Those are big signs. Yeah. And so the healthiest guys should do the best.
yeah. And that's what I think you're seeing now, like the rise of, like, this classic physique division, right? It's a sport where taking more is probably not going to be rewarded for a number of reasons. And you start to see those guys, like, just growing.
Well, and if you look at their skin, even like see how clear their skin is and
Yeah.
nice and smooth, and like everything about it's aesthetic. Whereas, when we get the open class, like I was open class and everything else, you're looking for that weird, grainy, strange
Yeah.
look, right?
Yeah, this guy looks like a catcher's mitt.
That's right,
With
yeah.
with a 12-pack. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, it was funny. Somebody told me that my calves, because my skin, like I'm getting older and stuff. Like they're like, your calves are like great big ripe avocados when I went back in the day, right? But it's because your skin starts like showing it, right? When you start to become unhealthy, your skin will show it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
I
the
mean,
biggest
at the
organ
end
in
of the
your
day, the
body.
idea for me is to I want to help out pro bodybuilders become as healthy as they possibly can in their off season,
Yeah.
so they can kick ass in their on season, because a lot of these guys don't have anything else but the sport.
Yeah.
Like-
And I think that's a very, like, realistic approach to, like, understand the risks that are, like, that are inextricably linked with it. Because, like, most people are trying to be healthy all the way through the show. It's like, yeah, your real benefit's going to come 30 weeks out.
Absolutely,
Not
and that's
12 weeks
what
out.
you should be doing. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, all these PEDs, all the stuff we eat, everything else, like your body will need a rest from it. And even like if you're taking copious amounts of androgens during the on season, like when you're in competition, you're going to have to desaturate all the receptors in your body because really at the end of the day, these are receptor mediated responses. And as we all know, if you increase the amount of stuff over time and keep it there, you'll start getting internalization of receptors and whatnot. So really you're just like pumping a whole bunch of stuff into yourself that's not binding to things to do what you want it to do. So you need to get really, really healthy so that when you do attack this kind of competition phase, that the absorption's high, gut health is perfect, everything's great, so that, you know, when you're done, you can get back healthy again, and then you'll grow constantly. If your body's under a state of stress all the time, it's not going to grow.
Yeah, I think that's an appealing message, because most people who enter into the conversation around health and bodybuilding are sacrificing the end result on stage, which is a look that historically is not quote unquote healthy. And guys are just like not even listening, because they're like, no, I want to be competitive. Like I'm not going to do things to sacrifice my standing on stage. So they completely ignore that side. So it's always been an issue of like the health and the medical field not meeting bodybuilders halfway. So it's cool to hear like you go, no, we're going to sort this out in the off season. And then it's like, look, when you got to fucking do what you got to do, you got to do what you got to do. But like, you know, in the off season, we're going to spend some time focusing on this so that, you know, you can go ahead and partake in hopefully a little bit more of a safer manner when you have to take these drugs going on to a competition.
Absolutely. It's like no different than thinking of like if you owned a gas station and that's how you like pay the bills, right? And then all of a sudden, like everybody's getting electric cars and they're giving you the finger driving by your gas station. But it's like, yeah, I'll do the minimum to the environment. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the way I, you know, advertise. I'm going to change the way I'm going to make sure we're environmentally friendly. We'll test the soil, do all these things. It'd be like doing that, being a gas station owner like 20 years from now, kind of one of the last guys. You want to make sure that you're, you know, like even though you're doing something you might be maybe causing detriment, right? You're actually doing everything in your power to make sure you don't detriment it, because you need this thing to put food on the table.
Yeah.
And this is when people choose their sports. That's why, you know, you see football players and everybody else, like when you get injured and you have to leave it, you see all this depression and stuff come in, right? Because it's what you know. So
yeah.
So longevity, right? Like you got
yeah, I mean, it's an attrition game,
That's
really, right? Like no one's winning a Sandow posthumously, right? No one's taking that home from beyond the grave. But I think, like, because you make an interesting point, like bodybuilders are, I would say, the people most closely tied to their ability to generate revenue and their body, yet they're the people who seem to know the least amount about it.
Yes and no. The young guys coming up are pretty smart.
Yeah?
Yeah, they're getting smart, I think. The ones I hang around are.
Well, yeah. I wonder if that's just by proxy, though.
Yeah. So that's why I like the fact that we have social media to kind of get out there, you know, do these kind of things, get out there to the general pop. I help, like I said, I help a lot of people daily, and I understand the plight of the athlete.
Yeah.
And I've always been in single sports that cause a lot of injury. So, you know, I've got the knowledge and the mileage.
Yeah, I think I'd like to do the. I want to get you on again and talk more on like the nutrition side, the preemptive side. I know this is more like the crazy, ugly side of bodybuilding, but so if people reach out again on Instagram, it's
at DRDN Jackson.
All
right. So my name's Dwayne N. Jackson.
Okay, we'll throw that up in the show notes and make sure we link everything. And yeah, dude, I appreciate you taking the time. Definitely have to have you on, and we'll go a little bit deeper into the weeds on what I think to be not the fun stuff, but maybe something that'll hopefully stop people from having to slide into your DMs and be like, "God, I got the foamy piss thing, doc. Like, what do you think?" But yeah, so reach out on Instagram over social media. We'll put everything in the show notes, man. I appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, buddy.